My stepmom and stepsister framed me for a crime I didn't commit, threatening to ruin my life. Now, the truth is out, and they're the ones facing justice. James, 25 years old. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 14, leaving just me and my dad. For years, it was the two of us against the world. Dad threw himself into our family business in raising me, somehow managing to excel at both. When I turned 18, Dad dropped a bombshell. He wanted to start dadding again. Enter Karen, a widow with a 21-year-old daughter named Brittany. They seemed nice enough at first, but looking back, I should have seen the red flags. After they moved in, things changed. Karen was all smiles when Dad was around, but when he wasn't, her true colors showed. Brittany seemed to resent my very existence, but I kept my mouth shut, not wanting to cause problems for Dad. Despite the tension at home, I threw myself into the family business. By 25, I was working as Dad's assistant, learning every aspect of the company. Brittany, on the other hand, treated her job as Dad's secretary like a joke. Then came the day that changed everything. Dad called a family meeting and announced he was thinking about retirement. He said he'd be nomming his successor as CEO in 6 months at the company's anniversary celebration. The atmosphere at home and work changed dramatically after that. Most employees assumed I'd be the natural choice for CEO, given my years of education. But there were whispers about Brittany too, mainly due to Karen's increasing influence over company matters. Then, about a month after the initial announcement, everything exploded. It was a Friday afternoon. I was in a meeting with some of our top clients when my phone started buzzing incessantly. I ignored it at first, but when it wouldn't stop, I excused myself to check it. There were dozens of missed calls and messages, all from Dad. My heart dropped as I listened to the first voicemail. "James, you need to come home right now. There's been an accusation. It's serious, come home immediately." I apologized to the clients and rushed out, my mind racing. What kind of accusation? From whom? When I got home, the scene that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. Dad was packing in the living room, his face ashen. Karen was sitting in the center of the coffee table, was a pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Dad turned to me, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "James, Brittany says you've been forcing yourself on her, that you've been threatening her to keep quiet, and now she's pregnant." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt like I was going to be sick. "What? That's insane. I've never touched her. You can't possibly believe this." Brittany's sobs grew louder. Karen shot me a venomous look. "How dare you call my daughter a liar? We have proof." She thrust a piece of paper at me. It was a DNA test, apparently showing a match between me and Brittany's unborn child. "This is impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "It's all lies. Dad, you know me, you know I would never do something like this." Dad looked torn, his gaze shifting between me and Brittany. I don't know what to think, James. These are serious accusations. And the evidence." "It's fake," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "It has to be. I'm being set up." Karen stood up, her face a mask of righteous anger. "We trusted you, James. You were family, and this is how you repay us. By abusing my daughter?" "I didn't do anything," I protested, looking wildly around the room. "This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare." "We're prepared to go to the police," Karen continued, her voice cold. Unless what?" Dad asked, speaking for the first time in several minutes. Karen's eyes glittered with triumph. "Unless you agree to remove James from the company and the house. Immediately. We'll keep this quiet, avoid a scandal, but he has to go. Tonight." "No," I yelled, turning to Dad. "You can't believe this." "Please, Dad, you know me. You know I would never." But I could see the conflict in his eyes. The evidence looked damning, and the thought of a public scandal could destroy everything he'd worked for. "I'm sorry, James," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I think it's best if you leave for now, until we can sort this out." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own father, the man who had raised me, who I thought knew me better than anyone, was choosing to believe this outrageous lie. "Fine," I spat, anger and hurt warring inside me. "I'll go. But this isn't over. The truth will come out." I stormed upstairs to pack a bag, my mind reeling. As I was shoving clothes into a duffel, there was a soft knock at my door. It was Dad. "James," he said, his voice low, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to say this loud enough for anyone listening to hear. I'm disappointed in you, and I think it's best if we don't have any contact for a while." I opened my mouth to argue, but he held up a hand, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He pressed it into my hand, giving me a significant look. "Is that clear?" he said loudly. Confused, I nodded. "Crystal clear," I replied, matching his volume. Dad left and I unfolded the note. In his familiar handwriting were the words that would change everything. I believe you. Stay at Mark's hotel. I'll be in touch. Trust no one else. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. Dad believed me. We had a chance to fight this. As I left the house, Karen and Brittany watched from the living room, poorly concealed smirks on their faces. They thought they'd won. But little did they know, the real battle was just beginning. I checked into my friend Mark's hotel, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. One thing was certain, I wasn't going down without a fight. Somehow, someway, I was going to expose their lies and reclaim my life. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. Café Blow, 2 p.m. Come alone. I knew it had to be Dad. It was time to start planning our counterattack. As I sat in the cafe, waiting for Dad to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Anger at Brittany and Karen for their outrageous lies. Hurt that anyone could think I was capable of such a thing. But mostly, determination. Determination to clear my name and bring the truth to light. Dad arrived, looking haggard but resolute. He sat down across from me, ordered a coffee, and leaned in close. "All right, son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's figure out how to take these liars down." Dad and I spent the next hour in that cafe, heads close together, speaking in hushed tones as we formulated our plan. It was clear that Karen and Brittany had gone to great lengths to fabricate this accusation, which meant we needed to be equally thorough in our investigation. "First things first," Dad said, pulling out a notepad. "We need a private investigator. Someone discreet, thorough, and not affiliated with anyone in the company." I nodded. "I might know someone. Remember Mark's cousin, the ex-cop? He's been working as a PI for a few years now." Dad's eyes lit up. "Perfect. Get in touch with him as soon as possible. We need to start digging into Karen and Brittany's backgrounds, their recent activities, everything." We spent the next few minutes outlining what we wanted the PI to focus on. The fake pregnancy test, the falsified DNA results, and any suspicious behavior or connections that might shed light on their motivations. Next, Dad continued, we need to gather our own evidence. They've been careful so far, but everyone slips up eventually. We just need to be there to catch it when they do. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out 3 boxes. These are the latest smartphones on the market. I'm going to give 2 of them to Karen and Brittany as peace offerings. Little do they know, these phones are installed with spyware that will forward all their communications directly to us. I couldn't help but be impressed by Dad's foresight. That's brilliant. But what about the 3rd phone? That's for you, he said, sliding it across the table. We can't risk them intercepting our communications. We'll use these to stay in touch, encrypted, untraceable. As we continued to plan, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. We were fighting back, and we had the element of surprise on our side. Over the next few days, our plan started to take shape. The PI Jake began his investigation, digging into Karen and Brittany's past with a fine-toothed comb. Dad successfully delivered the bugged phones, playing the part of the conflicted husband and stepfather perfectly. I just want to make sure we can all stay in touch during this difficult time, he told them, his acting deserving of an Oscar. Karen and Brittany accepted the gifts eagerly, completely unaware of the trap they were walking into. Meanwhile, I was holed up in Mark's hotel, monitoring the incoming data from the phones. It was mind-numbing work, sifting through countless texts and emails, most of which were mundane. But I knew that somewhere in this digital haystack was the needle that would unravel their whole scheme. About a week into our covert operation, Dad called me on our secure line. "James, I think it's time for phase 2, he said without preamble. "I'm gonna suggest we all get our cars serviced. It's the perfect opportunity to install GPS trackers and hidden cameras." I agreed, and within days, every vehicle in the family fleet was equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. It felt surreal, like something out of a spy movie, but I reminded myself that this was all necessary. We were fighting for the truth, for justice. The final piece of our surveillance puzzle came in the form of our home. Dad proposed a weekend getaway for himself, Karen, and Brittany, citing a need to process recent events and come together as a family. It made me sick to hear him say those words, knowing the kind of people Karen and Brittany really were. But I understood the necessity. As soon as they left for their trip, I sprang into action. With the help of a security expert Dad had quietly hired, we turned our family home into a veritable surveillance hub. Hidden cameras and microphones were installed in every room, each feeding back to a secure server that only Dad and I could access. By the time they returned from their weekend away, we had eyes and ears everywhere. Now all we had to do was wait. The waiting, as it turned out, was the hardest part. Days turned into weeks, and while we were gathering mountains of data, nothing concrete had emerged. Karen and Brittany were careful, almost frustratingly so. They rarely discussed their plan openly, and when they did, it was in vague terms that could be interpreted innocently if needed. I was starting to feel discouraged, wondering if we'd ever find the smoking gun we needed. That's when Jake, our pie, came through with his first major breakthrough. We met in a nondescript diner on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. Jake slid a thick folder across the table to us. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said, his voice low but excited. "First off, the pregnancy test and DNA results? Definitely fake. I managed to track down a nurse at Oakwood Clinic who admitted to falsifying the documents. She's willing to testify for a price." Dad and I exchanged glances. This was huge, but we both knew it wasn't enough on its own. Karen and Brittany could claim the nurse was lying, that we had bribed her to say this. "There's more," Jake continued, sensing our hesitation. I did some digging into Karen's past. Turns out, this isn't the first time she's pulled something like this. She has a history of latching onto wealthy men, manufacturing drama, and then walking away with hefty settlements. She's just gotten better at covering her tracks over the years. He pulled out several documents, laying them on the table. Divorce papers, police reports, old news articles, all painting a picture of a woman who had made a career out of manipulation and deceit. "And Brittany?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jake's expression turned grim. "She's her mother's daughter, all right. No criminal record, but a string of almost incidents. Accusations of theft from former employers that were suddenly dropped, ex-boyfriends who cut off all contact after messy breakups. Nothing concrete, but a pattern that's hard to ignore." As we pored over the documents, I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. We were finally getting somewhere, uncovering the truth about these women who had invaded our lives. But the depth of their deception was staggering. "There's one more thing," Jake said, hesitating for the first time. "It's about Karen. She's not being faithful to your father." I saw Dad's knuckles whiten as he gripped the edge of the table, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Tell me everything." Jake nodded, pulling out a final set of photographs. They showed Karen in various compromising positions with a man I didn't recognize. "His name is Robert Caldwell," Jake explained. "He's a small-time con man with big ambitions. From what I've gathered, he and Karen have been planning this for months. The ultimate con, marry into wealth. Get rid of the competition, i.e. you, James, and then divorce your father, taking him for everything he's worth." The pieces were finally falling into place. This wasn't just about the CEO position or family drama. This was a calculated, long-term scheme to rob us of everything we had worked for. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photos of his wife in another man's arms. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hard with determination. "This ends now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We have enough to confront them, but I want more. I want it to be ironclad. No wiggle room, no chance for them to slither out of this." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride for my father's strength. "What's our next move?" Dad thought for a moment. Then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "I think it's time for me to take a business trip. A week should be enough time for Karen to get careless, don't you think?" And so our final trap was set. Dad announced a sudden business trip, apologizing profusely for leaving during such a difficult time. Karen and Brittany played their parts perfectly, acting concerned and supportive. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed their act myself. As soon as Dad left, I sequestered myself in our makeshift surveillance room, watching and waiting. For the first few days, nothing much happened, but on the fourth night, we hit the jackpot. Karen invited Robert over, clearly thinking she had the house to herself. What followed was an hour-long conversation that laid bare their entire plan. They discussed the fake pregnancy, the plot to oust me from the company, and their scheme to divorce Dad and take control of his assets. They even laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate everyone. I felt a mixture of disgust and triumph as I listened. This was it, the smoking gun we had been waiting for. With this recording, there would be no doubt about their guilt. I immediately called Dad on our secure line. "We got them," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "We got everything." Dad's voice was tight with controlled anger when he replied, "Good, I'm coming home tomorrow. It's time to end this charade." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was almost over. Soon, we would confront Karen and Brittany with the truth, and our long nightmare would finally come to an end. But little did I know, the most dramatic chapter of this saga was yet to unfold. The next day felt like the calm before a storm. I watched through our surveillance system as Karen and Brittany went about their day, completely unaware that their world was about to come crashing down. It was surreal, seeing them act so normal, knowing what I knew. Dad arrived home that evening, earlier than expected. I watched on the cameras as Karen greeted him with a hug and a kiss, playing the part of the devoted wife perfectly. It made my stomach turn. "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice calm but firm, family meeting in the living room. Now I saw confusion flicker across Karen's face, but she nodded and called for Brittany. As they assembled in the living room, I made my way to the front door. It was time for me to make my entrance. The look on Karen and Brittany's faces when I walked into the living room was priceless. Shock, fear, and then quickly masked anger flashed across their features. "What is he doing here?" Karen demanded, turning to Dad. "After what he did to Brittany, how could you bring him back into this house?" Dad held up a hand, silencing her. "Sit down, all of you. We have a lot to discuss." As we all took our seats, I could feel the tension in the room. It was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Dad stood in the center of the room, looking at each of us in turn. "For the past few weeks," he began, "I've been conducting my own investigation into Brittany's accusations against James, and what I've discovered is, well, it's going to change everything." Karen started to protest, but Dad cut her off. "No, Karen, you've done enough talking. Now it's time for you to listen." He nodded to me and I pulled out my laptop, connecting it to the TV. "What you're about to see and hear is the result of our investigation," I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. For the next hour, we played the recordings, showed the photographs, and presented the evidence we had gathered. The fake pregnancy test, the falsified DNA results, Karen's infidelity, their entire scheme laid bare. Throughout it all, Karen and Brittany sat in stunned silence. Their faces cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, defeat. When the final recording played, the conversation between Karen and Robert where they gleefully discussed their plans, Brittany broke down in tears. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed at her mother. "You said this was about getting what we deserved, about securing our future, but you were just using me." Karen's face was a mask of fury. "Oh, don't act so innocent, Brittany. You were a willing participant in all of this. Don't you dare try to play the victim now." As mother and daughter turned on each other, Dad cleared his throat, silencing them both. "I've already spoken with my lawyers," he said, his voice cold. "Karen, divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. Given the evidence of your infidelity and conspiracy, you'll be lucky if you walk away with the clothes on your back." He turned to Brittany. "As for you, young lady, you have a choice to make. You can either come clean, admit to your part in this scheme, or face charges of false accusation and attempted extortion. Either way, your time in this family and this company is over." The room fell silent as the weight of Dad's words sank in. Karen's face had gone pale, while Brittany looked shell-shocked. "You can't do this," Karen whispered, but there was no fight left in her voice. She knew it was over. "I can, and I will," Dad replied. "You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'll have you removed." With that, he stood up and walked out of the room. I followed, leaving Karen and Brittany to face the ruins of their failed scheme. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and damage control. True to his word, Dad filed for divorce, and with our mountain of evidence, it was quickly granted. Karen left with nothing but her personal belongings, her dreams of wealth and power turned to dust. Brittany, faced with the reality of her situation, chose to come clean.